The unlikely introduction. The bustling halls of Galactic University were alive with the usual flurry of activity. Alien students, each from different corners of the universe, moved through the corridors, chattering in their native tongues or engaging in deep philosophical debates about the mysteries of the cosmos. In one corner of the university, a brightly lit sign displayed an announcement that no one could have predicted. In the spirit of interspecies understanding and cultural exchange, students are now permitted to bring their domesticated companions to class. Zix, a tentacled Terran from the Flarian species, stood motionless, his mind struggling to process the news. His tentacles writhed in disbelief, curling in all directions as he read the holographic message over and over again. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered to himself, his usual confidence shaken by the absurdity of the announcement. Blur, his roommate, was floating nearby, his gelatinous form pulsating gently with each movement. Blur's several eyes flicked toward Zix, noticing the look of genuine concern on his friend's face. "What's the matter?" Blur's voice was almost musical, vibrating softly as his voice echoed in the air. Zix didn't answer immediately, instead looking up at the message once more. "They're really letting us bring pets to class. Can you imagine?" He was almost laughing, but there was a nervous edge to his tone. Some of those Deathworlders, especially the humans, have pets that could probably eat us. Have you seen what they call dogs? Blur, ever the optimist, simply rolled his eyes. Well, at least Zix imagined he did, considering how difficult it was to discern any expression on Blur's shifting form. "Oh, come on, Zix," Blur bubbled. "How bad could it be? Maybe they'll bring something cute, like a tiny fuzzy creature with big eyes that'll melt your cold, cruel heart." Zix snorted in disbelief. "I wouldn't bet on it. Last time I saw a human's pet, it was this horrific beast, a German shepherd, I think they called it. Its teeth were as long as my arm." Zix's mind briefly flashed to the horrific images Jathar, a student from a neighboring planet, had shared in one of their off-the-record seminars. The creature in question was an absolute nightmare. Muscles bulging beneath a thick coat of fur, eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. Zix had nightmares for weeks. "They're not pets. They're killing machines," Zix muttered under his breath, shaking his head as he glanced around the room. "We're going to be massacred." Blur gave a low chuckle, sending ripples through his body. Okay. Maybe some of the pets might be a bit intimidating, but there's no harm in a little cultural exchange, right? You've seen those cute little earth rodents they call hamsters, haven't you? What's the worst they could do? Run around in circles. Before Zix could respond, the hologram of the announcement flickered again, confirming that indeed, the policy would go into effect the next day. "Well," Zix sighed, "we'll find out tomorrow. I just hope no one brings a giant snake, or worse, a planet-destroying roach." The next day, the students of Galactic University filed into their lecture halls as they always did. But this time, something was different. There was a strange buzz in the air, an anticipation that hadn't existed before. No one was sure what to expect, but everyone was curious. Aliens from every corner of the galaxy, from the smallest insectoid to the most towering giants, all seemed a little more uneasy as they settled into their seats. Professor Jinro, a highly respected member of the academic council and an expert on biology, slithered into the lecture hall with his usual air of authority. His glimmering scales sparkled under the bright lights, but today, something was off. Jinro, a veteran of galactic academia, had taught thousands of students, had lectured on everything from xenobiology to advanced genetics. He had faced giant predators, monstrous creatures, and terrifying ecosystems in his years of research. Yet nothing prepared him for the sight that awaited him as he entered his lecture hall. There, sitting at the front row, was a human student named Todd. Todd, with his broad smile and disarming charm, had decided to bring his pet to class. And what a pet it was! The creature sitting on Todd's lap was unlike anything Jinro had ever seen. It looked like a giant, four-legged beast, massive muscles rippling beneath a thick, coarse coat of fur. The creature's eyes gleamed with intelligence, but they also radiated an unmistakable sense of raw power. Its ears perked up as it glanced around the room, revealing rows of terrifyingly sharp teeth as its tongue lolled out of its mouth. Jinro's heart skipped a beat. He had dealt with terrifying creatures before, but this was no ordinary animal. "Mr. Todd," Professor Jinro exclaimed, his voice tight with shock. "What in the name of the 7 moons is that thing?" Todd, unfazed by the reaction, beamed with pride. "This is Rex, my German shepherd. Isn't he adorable?" Todd scratched the creature behind its pointed ears, and the beast let out a low growl of approval. The sound reverberated through the room like a deep thunderclap. Before anyone could recover, Rex did something that would haunt the memory of every student in that lecture hall forever. With a thunderous bark that rattled the very walls, Rex leaped off Todd's lap, sending desks skidding across the floor. Several students, including Zix, were thrown into the air. A Glee student, whose appendages were designed to blend into the environment, emitted a high-pitched shriek and began darting across the room in a panic. Jinro could barely keep his composure. "Adorable," he sputtered, his usually calm demeanor cracking. "That thing could tear us all to pieces with a single swipe." But Todd simply laughed, as though this was the most normal thing in the universe. "Don't worry, he's harmless. He's just really excited to meet new people." Just as the chaos began to settle, another student stood up. Lisa, a human girl, was casually stroking the long, winding coils of a ball python wrapped around her neck. "This is Noodle," she said, smiling as she adjusted the snake's position. "She's very friendly. Don't worry about her." Nearby, a Floyan student, a being whose skin was entirely chlorophyll-based, fainted at the sight of the python. His fainting was followed by a string of nervous gasps as other alien students tried to avoid eye contact with the bizarrely calming snake. Meanwhile, other pets began to reveal themselves. A small, scrappy ferret darted between the desks, hiding in the pockets of Glee students. The chaos was just beginning. And then, as if to add another layer of madness to the already surreal situation, a human student named Sarah appeared in the back of the room with a cat curled up in her lap. The cat, a small tabby named Whiskers, blinked lazily at the alien students, its presence so ordinary that it was almost too much for them to handle. For the aliens, a pet was a symbol of danger or destruction, not a creature to be cherished. But here were these humans, acting as though their pets were simply another part of their everyday lives. Professor Jinro, his mind spinning, tried to regain control. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of the situation. Let's try to focus." But it was clear that this would not be an ordinary lecture. This would go down in history as the day when Deathworlders brought their pets to class, and the galaxy would never be the same. The day of chaos. The following morning, Galactic University buzzed with the excitement and dread of what was about to unfold. The campus had transformed overnight from a place of quiet academic pursuit into something unrecognizable. Alien students from every corner of the galaxy, some of whom had lived for centuries and encountered countless different life forms, now found themselves utterly unprepared for what lay ahead. They shuffled into their classrooms, trying to shake off the creeping tension that had taken root the moment they woke up. The announcement from the day before was still fresh in their minds. Pets in class. The idea was laughable, even dangerous. What kind of students brought pets to a university? More specifically, what kind of pet owners were these humans? The message was clear. The humans, mysterious, unpredictable, and often reckless, had once again managed to turn the expected into the unexpected. Professor Jinro had arrived at the lecture hall early, hoping to brace himself for the oncoming storm. His mind raced with thoughts of how to manage a room full of aliens and humans, all with their personal companions. It was a disaster in the making. He knew it. There was no denying it. His tail twitched nervously as he reviewed his notes. Still, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of curiosity. He had taught about creatures from across the galaxy, everything from deadly predators to peaceful herbivores. But this was something entirely new. Could it be that humans were genuinely different? Could it be that their so-called pets weren't just tools of destruction, as he'd originally feared, but creatures of loyalty, comfort, and even healing? Or was it all just a colossal mistake waiting to happen? When the students began to trickle in, Jinro was greeted with a bizarre sight. Some had arrived early to secure the best seats, while others shuffled in hesitantly, their eyes darting around as if expecting a catastrophe. As the clock struck, students filed into the room, and a quiet hum of chatter filled the air. But it wasn't the usual low murmuring. No, today the atmosphere was charged with an electric mix of excitement and anxiety. Alien students eyed the humans and their pets suspiciously. Zix, the tentacled Turin, was already in his seat, clutching his notes tightly. He was nervously scanning the room, trying to keep his tentacles from betraying his anxiety. He had seen some of the pets yesterday, but the human species was nothing if not full of surprises. Zix looked over at Blur, who was hovering just behind him in his usual gelatinous form. "I can't shake the feeling that something is off," Zix whispered, his voice barely audible to the others. "I've never been so unsure of anything in my life." Blur's many eyes twinkled as he gave a soft chuckle, his voice vibrating in a soothing hum. "Relax, Zix. It's just a bunch of fluffy earth creatures. How bad could it possibly be? At worst, we'll just have a few more barky interruptions." He gestured to the far corner of the room, where Todd, the human with the German shepherd, was sitting, scratching his pet behind its ears. Todd, as usual, appeared completely unbothered. "Come on, Rex. You've got to sit still, buddy. This is school, not a dog park." He laughed, rubbing the dog's ears affectionately. Rex, with his enormous stature, seemed completely unfazed by the chaos unfolding around him. He simply gave Todd an affectionate nudge with his snout, sending the human toppling backward in his seat, much to the amusement of those watching. Professor Jinro cleared his throat, trying to reassert some semblance of control. He slithered up to the front of the room, his voice shaky but firm. All right, he began. "Let's attempt to focus on the lesson. We have an important topic today: the evolutionary adaptations of non-threatening herbivores in the Cygnus system. Let's..." But before he could finish his sentence, a commotion erupted from the back of the room. Lisa, who had brought her python, Noodle, to class, had decided it was time for a snack. A small rodent, which she had apparently brought along for Noodle's feeding, was now wriggling in its cage, just out of the snake's reach. Noodle, sensing her opportunity, slithered down from Lisa's neck and made a beeline for the rodent's cage. In a flash, Noodle was coiled around the cage, and the rodent was soon swallowed whole. The scene was bizarre and utterly captivating, but the alien students had no context for it. To a species who viewed serpents as terrifying, the sight of a giant snake devouring a meal was a shocking breach of social decorum. Zix, already on edge from the chaos of yesterday, wasn't sure whether to faint or scream. He couldn't take his eyes off Noodle's glistening scales and the way her tongue flicked in and out of her mouth. A nearby Venusian student, who had been observing Lisa, leaped out of his seat, his appendages flailing wildly in panic. "I've seen enough," Zix muttered to Blur. "This is the worst possible day. First, the giant dog, and now a snake-eating lunch. What's next?" Blur, who appeared oddly calm, simply gave a gentle hum. "It's definitely interesting," he said, as though he were commenting on an exotic delicacy. "I've never seen this kind of meal sharing before. On my homeworld, we have a much more formal dining structure." But the true chaos hadn't even started yet. As Lisa and Noodle calmly finished their snack, a distant sound began to echo in the room. A loud, high-pitched shriek echoed throughout the hall, followed by the frantic flapping of wings. Everyone turned in unison to see a brightly colored parrot soaring across the room. The bird, which belonged to Alex, a fellow human student, was circling the hall with a frenetic energy that only seemed to amplify the tension in the air. The parrot squawked in a cacophony of languages, alternating between mimicking alien mating calls and loudly proclaiming in perfect English, "Human for lunch. Human for lunch." Several students, including a group of Glee, began to panic, unsure whether the parrot was announcing an impending attack or merely acting out. But before things could escalate further, the bird suddenly swooped down, landing on Alex's head with a triumphant squawk. Alex, completely unfazed, reached up and petted the bird affectionately. "All right, calm down, buddy," he chuckled, as if this were just another ordinary day in the life of a human student. To the rest of the room, it was nothing short of terrifying. For the aliens, the concept of an Earth pet, one that was not bound by reason or diplomacy, was something they could barely comprehend. How could anyone live in such chaotic unpredictability? How could anyone willingly invite that kind of unpredictability into their lives? The lesson, which had started as a calm academic session, had now become a full-fledged spectacle. And yet, even in the midst of chaos, the humans seemed to revel in the madness. Todd and his German shepherd, Rex, were now playing a game of chase with Alex's ferret, Bandit, darting between desks and causing a scene of utter chaos. Students leaped over furniture to avoid the playful yet dangerous German shepherd, while the ferret caused further destruction, snatching up anyone's snacks along the way. At this point, Professor Jinro was no longer attempting to control the room. He had given up any notion of order. He was simply watching the spectacle unfold, his mind reeling. As the pets continued their antics, he realized that this class, though chaotic and unorthodox, was something humanity had mastered. The art of turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. The bell rang, signaling the end of the lecture, but the room was still in disarray. And while some students tried to collect their things and leave, others couldn't help but linger, still trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. For Zix, the experience was both terrifying and strangely fascinating. As the class filed out, he turned to Blur with a look of bewilderment. "I'll admit it," Zix said. "I didn't think it would be this bad. But now I'm curious. What exactly is it about these Earth creatures that makes them so unpredictable?" The unexpected lesson. The following days at Galactic University were far from typical. The previous chaos of the first day had left an indelible mark on the students and professors alike. For many of the alien species, the idea of pets, or companions as the humans referred to them, had been incomprehensible. To them, pets were not merely animals that provided affection or comfort. They were dangerous forces of nature, beasts that could wreak havoc on any environment. The notion that humans would bring their pets into a classroom, where their academic minds were supposed to focus, was a concept that many struggled to accept. Professor Jinro, while still recovering from the traumatic events of the first day, found himself drawn into a strange kind of curiosity. As he slithered through the halls of the university, his mind continued to race. How could a species so adept at conquering new worlds, pushing the boundaries of science and exploration, coexist with such unpredictable creatures? What was it about these creatures, the so-called pets, that humans seemed so attached to? Could there be more to the bond between human and pet than mere companionship? His thoughts were interrupted when the next class began. Students shuffled into their seats, some with smiles, others with looks of quiet trepidation. The first thing that caught Jinro's attention was the unmistakable sound of paws padding across the floor. Looking up, he saw Todd, the human student with a massive German shepherd, Rex, strolling confidently to his seat. As usual, the creature was seated calmly at Todd's feet, its powerful muscles visible under its thick fur. But today, there was something different, something strangely serene about Rex. He wasn't barking, he wasn't chasing, and he wasn't even growling. Instead, he simply lay there, his eyes following the professor as though waiting for something. Jinro raised an eyebrow. He hadn't expected Rex to behave with such calmness after the chaos of their first encounter. Perhaps there was more to this creature than met the eye. He cleared his throat and began the lecture, trying to ignore the growing unease in his chest. Today, we'll continue discussing the behavioral patterns of non-threatening species from various star systems, he began, attempting to sound composed. As we've seen, every species has its defense mechanisms, whether it's the harmless yet peace-inducing spores of the harmlessness or the acidic sprays of the Gorgon spiders. However, today we are focusing on species that interact peacefully with others, and the human's domestic companions, which have proven to be an interesting anomaly. As he spoke, several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Zix, for one, was eyeing Rex with growing wariness, though the dog seemed entirely uninterested in the academic proceedings. Blur, hovering beside Zix, seemed strangely content. "I don't know what you're so worried about," Blur said, his voice light. "It's just a dog, right? A big one. But it's calm today. I think the humans might actually know what they're doing." Zix wasn't so sure. His tentacles twitched nervously as he glanced around the room. "You don't get it. This is a Deathworlder dog. Who knows what it might do when it gets bored?" His voice was low, tinged with both skepticism and anxiety. "I've seen these creatures do things that defy all logic. You can never predict them." Professor Jinro, sensing the discomfort in the room, paused. He cleared his throat again, his eyes scanning the students before focusing on Todd. "Mr. Todd, if you don't mind," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Could you explain to the class how you and your companion interact in your daily life? Perhaps it will shed light on how this particular species, Rex, you called it, has been domesticated and why it does not behave as other predators would." Todd smiled, clearly enjoying the attention. "Sure," he said, looking down at Rex, who had begun lazily licking his paw. "Well, Rex is actually a pretty chill dog. He's trained to help me, so he's learned a lot of commands, like sit, stay, come, and don't bite my homework." Todd's casual tone struck Jinro as bizarre, but at the same time, there was something oddly endearing about it. "You mean to say that this beast," Jinro began, "which looks capable of tearing through a dozen Glee students in seconds, actually listens to commands?" Todd chuckled, giving Rex a pat on the head. "Yeah, he's not always perfect, but he knows when to calm down. He's also pretty friendly, once you get to know him. I'll admit, he's a little intimidating at first, but after a while, you realize he's just as much a part of my family as any of my human friends. He's protective, yes, but loyal. That's the key." The professor blinked, his thoughts racing. Loyalty? He had never heard an alien species describe a creature as loyal in this way. Loyalty, to most of the species in the galaxy, was an abstract concept, something only a few sentient beings could truly grasp. But here, the human was describing it as if it were an innate trait of their pet. Jinro tried to digest this, but his mind kept circling back to one thing. How could a creature like Rex possess such a quality? At the back of the room, Lisa, the human with the ball python noodle, raised her hand, eager to add her perspective. "I think it's about trust," she said. "For me, Noodle helps me relax. After a tough day, I can just watch her slither around. It's comforting." The alien students exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of confusion and fascination. Zix couldn't help but tilt his head. "Trust," he repeated, almost incredulously. "You trust a snake?" Lisa nodded confidently. "Absolutely. She's not out to harm me. I can tell when she's relaxed and when she's feeling curious. It's not about dominance or fear. It's about understanding and connection. I think that's what makes humans so different from other species." A murmur spread through the room. The idea of trusting a creature that could potentially kill you in an instant was foreign to most of them. And yet, the humans seemed to live by it. To them, the bond between human and pet wasn't simply about ownership. It was about cooperation, mutual respect, and understanding. The pets in their eyes were not wild beasts to be feared or controlled. They were equals in a strange, symbiotic relationship. Suddenly, the door to the lecture hall swung open with a loud creak, and in walked a human student named Sarah, who was holding a small cat in her arms. The cat, a mischievous tabby named Whiskers, had a playful gleam in its eyes as it hopped out of Sarah's arms and onto the desk. Sarah smiled and began petting the cat, who immediately rolled onto its back, showing off its belly. The scene was so absurdly normal to Sarah that she couldn't fathom why anyone would be so perplexed. Zix's tentacles twitched again as he watched the cat's antics. "What is it about these creatures?" he whispered to Blur. "Why do they make such an impression on the humans? Why are they so calm around them?" Blur hovered thoughtfully. "Maybe it's because they're not afraid of them," he mused. "They trust them in a way that we, perhaps, don't understand. Maybe that's what makes humans human." As the lecture continued, with more stories of the human-pet relationships being shared, Jinro couldn't help but feel that something fundamental had shifted. He didn't fully understand it, but he knew one thing for sure. Today's class was unlike any he'd ever taught before. The concept of pets had evolved from something that he thought of as a mere novelty to something far more complex and integral to the human experience. As the class ended, Jinro dismissed the students, his thoughts still swirling. One thing was certain: this cultural exchange had only just begun, and the more he learned about the humans' pets, the more questions he had.